They sold her as infertile. 3 moons later, the Alpha King stood as proof they were wrong. Elira believed her life ended the night her family signed her away, calling her a failed Omega, useless for bonds, fit only to repay debts. She expected chains, labor, silence. She did not expect him. When Kalen, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, appeared beneath the stone steps of his keep, the moon itself seemed to pause. He didn't claim her by force. He didn't look at her like property. He looked at her like recognition. What followed was quiet, intimate, dangerous, because by the 3rd full moon, the impossible happened. And the Pax would soon learn. Elira was never broken. The word infertile had been spoken so many times in Elira's life that it no longer sounded cruel. It sounded ordinary, like weather, like fate. It was said in hushed voices behind doors, in sharp whispers at family gatherings, in the clipped, disappointed tone of healers who would not meet her eyes. Infertile Omega. Failed bloodline. End of legacy. By the time she turned 20, the word had settled into her bones. She stood now in the center of her family's hall, hands folded tightly at her waist, as the elders argued over her like she wasn't there. The room smelled of smoke and old wood, familiar and suffocating. This was the house she had scrubbed since childhood, the floorboards she had knelt on until her knees ached, the walls that had heard her cry and never answered back. "She's of no use to us," her uncle said, not bothering to lower his voice. "No Alpha will bond her. No heirs will come from her. We've wasted enough resources." Elira stared at the grain in the table, counting the lines so she wouldn't have to look up. She had learned early that silence was safer than protest. Silence didn't invite punishment. Silence didn't raise hopes. Her mother sat rigidly at the far end, hands clasped, eyes fixed on nothing. There was no cruelty in her face, only resignation. That hurt more. "The Northern Pax are willing to take her," her father said at last. His voice carried the finality of a verdict. "They'll clear our debts in exchange." Elira's breath caught, sharp and sudden. The Northern Territories were ruled directly by the Alpha King. Even the thought of that land carried weight. Power, law, death for those who crossed the line. "She'll be an Omega there," someone scoffed. "Labor, if nothing else." "Then it's settled," her father said. The word sold was never spoken. It didn't need to be. Elira felt something fold in on itself inside her chest. Not surprise, not even fear, just a quiet confirmation of everything she had always known. This was her purpose, to be exchanged, to be used, to disappear. When she finally looked up, her father flinched, not because of anger in her eyes, but because there was none at all. She was given an hour to gather her things. Elira packed slowly, deliberately. A single dress, a pair of boots worn thin at the heel, a small pendant her grandmother had given her before she died, pressed into her palm with a whisper about strength that Elira had never believed. She paused at the mirror, studying her reflection as if for the first time. She looked ordinary. Pale hair pulled back too tightly, shoulders always curved inward, as if apologizing for existing. No mark of sickness, no visible flaw. And yet, the verdict of her body had defined her entire life. She turned away before she could ask the mirror why. The journey north passed in silence. The men escorting her spoke only when necessary, their voices clipped, professional. She sat in the back of the carriage, hands clasped, watching familiar lands fade into forests thick with shadow and mist. With every mile, the air felt heavier, charged in a way she couldn't name. Her skin prickled, as though the world itself was aware of her passing. By the time the stone steps of the Alpha King's keep rose before them, night had fallen. The keep loomed out of the dark like something carved from the mountain itself, ancient, unyielding, crowned by moonlight. Torches burned low along the stairs, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward her feet. Elira stepped down, heart hammering. That was when she felt it, Not fear, not dread. Recognition. It came like a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. A subtle shift in the air, a tightening beneath her ribs, a warmth that spread through her chest as if something inside her had stirred from a long sleep. She froze, fingers curling into her cloak. Across the steps, a figure stood waiting. He was dressed in black, the fabric tailored and severe, his posture impossibly still. Long dark hair was pulled back from his face, catching silver where the moon touched it. His gaze lifted the moment her foot touched stone, sharp and unreadable, and locked onto her with devastating precision. The Alpha King. Elira dropped her eyes instinctively, lowering her head in deference. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She expected to feel small, insignificant. Instead, the air between them tightened. Kaelin descended the steps slowly, each movement deliberate, controlled. When he stopped before her, the guards fell back without a word, as if the space itself demanded it. He did not touch her. He did not circle her. He simply looked at her, and the moon shifted. Elira felt it, felt something ancient roll through the ground beneath her feet, through the marrow of her bones, like a low, resonant note struck deep within the world. Her breath caught, sharp and unsteady. She had never felt anything like it. Kaelin's eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, but with focus, with certainty. "This is the Omega?" he asked quietly. "Yes, my king," one of the men replied. "Elira, she has been declared infertile. Her family offers her in exchange for—" "That will be enough," Kaelin said. The man fell silent immediately. Elira dared to glance up then, just for a heartbeat. Their eyes met, and the warmth beneath her ribs flared, sudden and bright. She gasped softly before she could stop herself, pressing a hand to her stomach. Kaelin noticed. Something unreadable crossed his face, not shock, not doubt, recognition. "You are dismissed," he said to the escort. They hesitated, clearly unprepared. "My king, she stays," Kaelin said, voice calm but absolute. "You may inform her family that the debt is settled." No chains, no bargaining, no inspection. The men bowed and retreated, their footsteps echoing down the steps until Elira was alone with him beneath the moon. Her hands trembled. "I will not force a bond," Kaelin said, as if reading the fear she hadn't spoken. "You will not be claimed. You will not be owned." Elira swallowed hard. "Then, why am I here?" He studied her for a long moment before answering. "Because you crossed my lands," he said, and the moon answered. She didn't understand the words, but her body did. The warmth returned, softer now, steady, like a heartbeat that wasn't quite hers. Kaelin turned and gestured toward the doors. "Come. You will be given rooms, food, rest. Nothing more is required of you tonight." She hesitated, the instinct to obey warring with a deeper, unfamiliar pull, urging her forward. "Why?" she asked again, the word fragile on her tongue. He paused at the threshold and looked back at her, moonlight carving his features into something almost unreal. "Because you are not what they told you," he said simply. Something inside Elira cracked, not painfully, but cleanly, like ice breaking under spring light. She followed him inside. As the doors closed behind them, Elira felt the last weight of her old life slip from her shoulders. She was still afraid, still uncertain, still marked by years of being told she was broken. But for the first time, the word infertile no longer echoed in her mind like a curse. It sounded like a lie. And somewhere deep beneath her ribs, something ancient and patient stirred, as if it had been waiting, just for this moment, to wake. Kaelin felt her before he saw her. It began as a disturbance beneath the moon, subtle, almost imperceptible, like a single note played off-key in an ancient song he had memorized centuries ago. He was standing alone on the upper terrace of the keep when it happened, the night wind stirring his coat, the forest below breathing in its slow, endless rhythm. The moon hung full and bright above the northern territories, steady and obedient as it had always been. Until it wasn't. The shift rippled through him without warning, not pain, not threat, recognition so sharp it stole the air from his lungs. Kaelin's hand tightened on the stone railing as his senses flared wide, instinct surging before thought could catch up. The land answered first, trees leaning inward, shadows deepening, the ground humming with a low, ancient resonance that had not been heard in generations. The moon dimmed for a fraction of a second, then brightened again, as though recalibrating itself around a new truth. Someone had crossed his border. Not just anyone. Kaelin closed his eyes, reaching outward, following the thread of energy that now pulsed through the land like a heartbeat. It was faint, buried beneath layers of suppression and fear, but it was unmistakable. Old, pure, alive, impossible. His jaw tightened. No Omega carried that kind of resonance. No woman marked infertile by healers should be capable of stirring the moon itself. And yet the pull was undeniable, tugging at something he had not allowed himself to acknowledge in centuries. He opened his eyes just as the escort crested the lower path. She stepped into view, cloaked against the cold, her posture small but unbroken. Kaelin watched from above as she paused at the foot of the steps, as though the stone itself had whispered her name. The moment her boot touched the first stair, the resonance surged. The moon shifted again. Kaelin sucked in a sharp breath. His vision sharpened, silver flooding the edges of his sight as instinct slammed into him full force. This was no coincidence, no accident of timing. This was awakening. He descended the steps slowly, forcing control into every movement. Power answered him eagerly, coiling beneath his skin, but he kept it leashed. If he reacted too strongly, he would frighten her, and the fragile balance forming around her presence could shatter. Up close, the contradiction was staggering. She looked exactly as the reports had described. Unremarkable, quiet, an Omega shaped by years of being told to shrink. Her head bowed, shoulders drawn inward, scent muted by fear and resignation. Any other Alpha would have dismissed her at a glance. Kaelin felt the truth blaze beneath the surface. Her scent was wrong, not spoiled or empty, but layered, restrained, deliberately suppressed by years of herbal treatments and binding tonics meant to quiet what healers did not understand. Beneath that suppression lay something luminous. A depth of life energy so rare it made his chest ache. When her gaze lifted and their eyes met, the land held its breath. Elira gasped, one hand flying instinctively to her abdomen, and the pulse answered immediately, stronger, clearer, as if acknowledging him in return. Kaelin nearly staggered. The moon brightened, not in dominance, not in command, in answer. Kaelin straightened slowly, the weight of realization settling over him like armor and revelation all at once. This was why the Northern Territories had felt restless for months, why his dreams had been filled with half-formed echoes and unanswered calls, why the moon had grown unpredictable, shifting in ways the old texts insisted were impossible. She was the answer. Not a threat, not a weapon, a convergence. When the escort spoke of debts and infertility, Kaelin barely heard them. His focus remained on the woman before him, on the way her pulse echoed faintly against his own, on the subtle tremor running through the ground as if the land itself recognized her as something it had been waiting for. He dismissed the men without hesitation. The decision was already made, written into the fabric of the night the moment she crossed his lands. When they were alone, Kaelin studied her more carefully. Not as a ruler assessing property, but as a guardian confronting something sacred. Her fear was real, layered deep, but it was not the fear of deceit or ambition. It was the fear of someone who had learned that hope was dangerous. He would not be the one to prove her right. "I will not force a bond," he told her, voice deliberately steady. He felt the truth of the words echo through the moon itself, anchoring them. "You will not be claimed." Her confusion flickered across her face, raw and unguarded, and something in Kaelin's chest tightened painfully. He had ruled through wars and bloodshed without flinching. This quiet, fragile moment terrified him far more. When she asked why she was here, Kaelin chose honesty over explanation. "Because you crossed my lands," he said, and the moon answered. He watched the words settle into her, watched the way her body responded even as her mind resisted. The warmth beneath her ribs steadied, no longer flaring in panic but pulsing in quiet rhythm. The land exhaled. Good, he thought. She was listening, even if she didn't yet understand. As he led her into the keep, Kaelin remained acutely aware of every shift around them. The torches burned brighter, the shadows bent inward. The ancient wards etched into the stone hummed softly, recognizing her passage and adjusting without command. She belonged here, not as an omega offered in trade, as a catalyst. As the doors closed behind them, Kaelin allowed himself one silent admission he had not voiced in centuries. The moon had not shifted for him. It had shifted for her. And whatever destiny was unfolding beneath the northern sky, it had already begun the moment Elira Jensen, marked as broken by her own people, stepped onto his land and reminded the world that some truths could be buried but never erased. Elira woke expecting chains. The instinct was so ingrained that it surfaced before thought, before memory, before she even opened her eyes. Her body tensed, breath shallow, waiting for the weight of iron or the sting of command. Instead, she felt warmth. Thick blankets, a bed far softer than anything she had ever known. The air smelled faintly of pine and night rain, clean and alive. She opened her eyes slowly. The room was large but not cold, stone walls softened by woven tapestries and low burning lamps. Moonlight spilled through tall windows, pale and steady, painting silver across the floor. There were no bars, no locks she could see, no symbols of ownership. Elira sat up, confusion threading through her chest. A knock sounded at the door, not loud, not demanding, polite. "Come in," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Kaelin entered alone. He did not wear armor or ceremonial black this time. His clothing was simple, dark fabric that moved easily with him, sleeves rolled back as though he had come from work rather than a throne. He stopped several steps inside the room, leaving space between them, his posture relaxed but attentive. "You slept," he said. Elira nodded. "I didn't mean to." "That is what this place is for," he replied. "Rest is not a weakness." The words unsettled her more than any command could have. She studied him carefully, waiting for the shift, for the expectation to surface, the demand to be spoken aloud. It didn't come. "I was told—" She hesitated, fingers tightening in the blanket. "I was told I would be assigned work, that I would earn my keep." Kaelin's brow furrowed slightly, not in anger but in thought. "You owe nothing." The certainty in his voice made her chest ache. "My family is no longer your concern," he said calmly. "Their debt is settled. Their claim ended the moment they let you go." Let you go, as if she had ever been held by anything other than obligation. Elira swung her legs over the side of the bed, standing despite the tremor in her knees. Being upright helped her think, helped her remember who she was supposed to be. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "You said you would not force a bond. You said I wouldn't be claimed. Then why am I here?" Kaelin met her gaze without flinching. "Because you are safer under my protection than anywhere else." Protection. The word struck her like a foreign language. From what? He considered her for a moment, as if weighing how much truth her heart could carry without breaking. From those who would see you as a resource, a vessel, a means to an end. Elira swallowed. "And you don't?" "No." The answer came too quickly, too firmly to be rehearsed. It left her reeling. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I know enough," Kaelin said, "and I intend to learn the rest with your consent." Consent. The room felt suddenly too small. Elira turned away, pacing a few steps before she could stop herself. Her entire life had been shaped by expectations she had no power to refuse. Bonds arranged before desire, roles assigned before choice. Even her body had been judged and condemned without her say. "You could order me to stay," she said, testing the words. "No one would question it." "Yes," Kaelin agreed, "and yet you don't." "No." She turned back to him, searching his face for deception, for strategy. She found none. Only restraint, only patience. "What happens if I leave?" she asked. The question hung between them, fragile and sharp. Kaelin did not move closer. He did not soften his voice to persuade her. "Then you will leave," he said, "and I will ensure you have provisions and safe passage." Her breath caught. "You wouldn't stop me?" "No." The simplicity of it made her dizzy. "Even if the moon—" She stopped herself. "Even if the moon responds to you?" Kaelin finished gently. "Yes." Silence stretched. Elira pressed a hand to her chest, grounding herself against the unfamiliar sensation swelling there. Hope was dangerous. She had learned that early. Hope made you careless. Hope made the fall hurt more. "Why?" she asked again, softer now. Kaelin exhaled slowly, as though answering cost him something. "Because power taken by force rots," he said. "And what is awakening in you cannot survive that." Awakening. The word sent a shiver through her. She had felt it since stepping onto his land. That low hum beneath her skin, the subtle warmth that flared when he was near. She had told herself it was nerves, imagination. It was neither. "I don't feel powerful," she admitted. "I feel exposed." "That is because you have spent your life being told to hide," Kaelin said. "What you feel is the beginning of alignment, not danger." Alignment with what? The question rose to her lips, but another interrupted it. "If I stay," she said carefully, "what am I to you?" Kaelin's gaze darkened, not with hunger, but with gravity. "You are under my protection," he said. "Nothing more unless you choose it." "And if I choose nothing, then nothing will be taken." Elira laughed softly, the sound brittle. "You make it sound simple." "It isn't," he said, "but it is necessary." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Then I will stay," she said. "For now." Something eased in the air, subtle but real. The tension in Kaelin's shoulders lessened, just slightly. "Good," he said. "You will be shown the grounds today. There are places here that may help you feel less constrained." "Places," she echoed. "The forest," he clarified. "The river, areas untouched by pack hierarchy." Untouched. Elira felt something in her chest loosen. "I'd like that." Kaelin inclined his head. "I will have someone escort you, at a distance." "You won't?" she asked before she could stop herself. A faint smile touched his mouth, restrained but genuine. "Not unless you ask." The warmth beneath her ribs pulsed, slow and steady. When he turned to leave, Elira found herself speaking again. "Kaelin." He paused, looking back. "Thank you," she said. The words felt inadequate, but they were honest. His gaze softened. "You do not need to thank me for your own autonomy." After he left, Elira stood alone in the quiet room, heart racing, not with fear, but with something far more unsettling. Possibility. Later, as she walked the forest paths beneath a sky heavy with clouds, she felt it again, the sense of being seen without being claimed, protected without being possessed. The land seemed to recognize her footsteps, the leaves whispering as she passed, the river singing low and constant. For the first time, she was not bracing herself for what would be taken. She was waiting to discover what she might choose. And far above the treetops, the moon watched in silence, its light steady and patient, no longer shifting in alarm, but holding its breath in quiet anticipation. The bond did not arrive like a command. Elira had expected pain, or heat sharp enough to scorch, or the crushing certainty of being claimed without warning. That was how bonds were spoken of, violent things that snapped into place and rewrote a life in a single breath. She had grown up hearing Omega's whisper about the moment it happened, voices trembling with awe or fear, sometimes both. This was nothing like that. It began in quiet moments. In the hours she spent walking the forest paths alone, where the trees leaned close as if listening. In the stillness of early morning, when mist clung to the ground and the world felt half asleep. In the evenings, when Kaelin joined her by the fire, not too close, never crowding her space, and spoke of the land as if it were a living thing learned over centuries, not owned. At first, Elira thought the warmth beneath her ribs was simply comfort, the unfamiliar safety of not being watched for mistakes, of not having to earn her place with silence or obedience. She told herself that was enough to explain the way her breath steadied whenever Kaelin entered a room, the way the air seemed to settle around him, heavy and calm, but comfort did not hum. The sensation grew slowly, like a melody finding its rhythm. A low vibration that pulsed in time with her heartbeat, most noticeable when Kaelin was near, but never overwhelming. It didn't demand her attention. It invited it. One evening, as they stood on the eastern terrace watching the moon rise, Elira felt it shift for the first time. Kaelin had been speaking, something about the old boundaries between packs, drawn long before she was born, when the air changed. The warmth flared, sudden and bright, and Elira gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. Kaelin stopped instantly. "What is it?" he asked, his voice careful, restrained. She swallowed, searching for the right words. "It feels like something is waking up." The moon crested the mountains, silver light spilling across the stone. Elira's breath caught as the sensation deepened, spreading outward from her chest through her arms, her spine, her legs. Not pain, not fear, recognition. Kaelin did not touch her. He did not step closer. He merely turned toward her fully, his attention absolute, and in that moment the hum intensified, responding to him as surely as the moon responded to the tide. "This is the beginning," he said softly, "if you wish it to be." Her pulse thundered. "You can feel it too." "Yes." The admission carried weight, not dominance, but vulnerability. Elira looked up at him, really looked, and saw something she hadn't allowed herself to consider before, not an alpha waiting to claim. A man holding himself back. "What happens now?" she asked. Kaelin took a slow breath. "Nothing you do not choose." The words settled into her, anchoring the sensation instead of letting it spiral. Elira closed her eyes, focusing inward. The warmth responded, brightening, as if relieved to be acknowledged. Images flickered at the edge of her mind, not visions, not memories, but impressions. Roots winding deep into earth, moonlight filtering through leaves, a pulse of life, patient and steady. She opened her eyes again, startled. "I can feel the land." Kaelin's expression sharpened, not with alarm, but with awe. "That should not be possible yet." "Yet," she repeated faintly. The next days unfolded in subtle shifts. Elira found herself waking before dawn, her body humming with quiet energy. Her senses sharpened, sounds carried farther, scents layered and distinct, emotions easier to read in the space between words. When she touched the bark of a tree, she felt warmth beneath the surface, a slow, living rhythm that echoed her own. It frightened her at first. She kept expecting the sensation to vanish, to be revealed as imagination or temporary madness, but it stayed, steady, growing. Kaelin watched from a distance, never interfering unless she asked. When she did, his guidance was precise, careful. He taught her how to breathe through the surges, how to ground herself against the earth when the energy flared too brightly, how to let it flow instead of forcing it into shape. "This is not power meant to be wielded," he told her one afternoon as they stood by the river. "It is power meant to sustain." Elira knelt, trailing her fingers through the cold water. The river responded, ripples spreading outward in perfect circles. She stared, heart pounding. "I didn't do anything," she whispered. "You listened," Kaelin said. "That is enough." The bond strengthened in moments like these, not in touch, not in words spoken under oath, but in shared stillness, in glances held a second longer than necessary, in the way Kaelin always positioned himself slightly to her side, never blocking her path, always leaving her an exit. It confused her. She had expected the pull to make her feel smaller, drawn into someone else's gravity. Instead, it did the opposite. It made her feel larger. As if something that had been compressed inside her for years was finally being allowed to expand. One night, the sensation changed again. Elira woke from a dream she couldn't remember, heart racing, skin warm. The hum beneath her ribs had intensified, sharper now, insistent. She sat up, breath shallow, pressing a hand to her abdomen as the warmth gathered lower, coiling like a held breath. Kaelin was there before she called his name. He stopped just inside the doorway, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "You felt it." She nodded, unable to speak. "The bond is deepening," he said quietly. "Your body is responding." "Responding to what?" Fear edged her voice despite herself. "To safety," Kaelin replied. "To trust." The warmth surged again, stronger this time, and Elira gasped. A wave of energy rolled through her, not outward, but inward, settling deep and heavy. Tears pricked her eyes, unbidden. "It feels like I'm not empty," she whispered. Kaelin's jaw tightened. "You never were." The truth of it hit her all at once. All the years of being told she lacked something essential, all the treatments meant to quiet her body, to suppress what healers could not understand. The bond was not giving her something new. It was removing the restraints. Elira doubled over as the energy flared, instinctively reaching for the floor. Before she could fall, Kaelin was there, not grabbing, not restraining, but steadying her with a hand at her elbow, grounding her without overwhelming her senses. The contact was brief, but it was enough. The bond surged into clarity. A clean, resonant chord struck between them. Elira felt it settle, not locking into place, not sealing her fate, but aligning. Two forces recognizing each other without erasing what made them distinct. She sagged against the bed, breathing hard as the warmth eased into a steady glow. Kaelin withdrew his hand immediately, stepping back. "Are you hurt?" "No," she whispered. "Just changed." He nodded once. "That will happen again." A strange laugh bubbled up through her tears. "You say that like it's normal." "For you," he said gently, "it is." When he left her to rest, Elira lay back against the pillows, hands resting over the place where the warmth lingered strongest. Beneath it all, she felt something else now, faint but undeniable. A second rhythm, not yet a heartbeat, not yet anything she could name, but alive. Elira closed her eyes, wonder and fear twisting together in her chest. The bond had not taken her freedom. It had not demanded obedience or erased her will. It had awakened her. And somewhere beyond the walls of the keep, beneath the ever-watchful moon, the land responded in quiet anticipation, aware that something long dormant had begun to stir, and that the gentle bond forming between an Alpha King and an Omega once marked as broken would soon reshape far more than either of them yet understood. The first full moon after Elira arrived rose like a quiet witness. It slipped above the mountains with slow inevitability, silver spilling across the keep and the endless northern forest, painting everything in pale truth. Elira stood at her window and watched it climb, her breath fogging the cold glass. She told herself it was just the moon, an old light doing what it had always done. But her skin knew better. The hum beneath her ribs had been steady for days, no longer startling, no longer sharp. It lived inside her like a second pulse, subtle and constant. Sometimes it warmed her palms, sometimes it settled low in her abdomen, heavy as a held secret. And when she closed her eyes, she could feel the land as clearly as she could feel her own heartbeat. Roots twisting beneath the soil, water threading through stone, distant creatures moving through the dark like whispers. It should have frightened her more than it did. Instead, it made her feel real. She left her room before the moon reached its peak, drawn by an instinct she couldn't name. The corridors were quiet, the keep sleeping in soft shadows, but the air thrummed with awareness. As she moved, the wards carved into the stone seemed to brighten faintly, responding to her passage. Not alarmed, not resistant, welcoming. Elira's bare feet paused at the threshold of the courtyard. Cold stone kissed her skin. The night wind tugged at her hair, and the moment the moonlight touched her face, the hum inside her flared. Gentle, bright, like a candle being lit. Kalen was there. He stood near the center of the open space, still as a statue, head tilted back, eyes reflecting silver. He had not summoned her. He hadn't even asked if she would come. And yet his presence felt like an anchor in the open night, steady and calm. Elira stopped a few steps away, unsure if she should speak. Kalen turned toward her slowly, gaze sweeping over her with quiet attention. "You feel it," he said. It wasn't a question. Elira swallowed, nodding once. "It's louder tonight." His expression tightened, not with fear, but with something like reverence. The moon amplifies what is already waking. Elira wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't understand what's happening to me." Kalen took a step closer, then stopped, leaving the space between them intact. "You are changing," he said simply. "Not into something else. Into what you were always meant to be." The words landed gently, but they shook her anyway. She had spent her whole life believing her body had failed her, that she was missing something essential. Now it felt as if her body had been holding its breath for years and was finally exhaling. Kalen's gaze dipped, brief and careful, toward her midsection. "Do you feel it there?" Elira's hand rose instinctively to her abdomen. The warmth gathered instantly beneath her palm, responding as if it recognized her touch. She gasped softly. "Yes," she whispered. "It's like a tide." Kalen nodded slowly. "Good. Breathe with it. Don't resist." Elira closed her eyes and did as he said. The cold night air filled her lungs. The warmth in her belly spread, not burning, but blooming, threading up her spine, loosening something tight in her chest. Memories surfaced unbidden, the healer's bitter voice. "Your womb is barren," her mother's flat stare. "You'll never give us a legacy," her father's disgusted silence, as if her existence was an inconvenience he was forced to endure. Elira's throat tightened. Tears gathered behind her eyelids. She tried to swallow them down, but the warmth within her didn't allow suppression, not anymore. It rose like truth, pushing everything buried into the light. "I'm afraid," she admitted, voice trembling. Kalen's voice softened. "Of what?" "That it'll stop," she whispered. "That it's not real. That I'll wake up and be the same." There was a pause, and Elira felt him move. Not closer, not touching, but shifting his stance as if he was aligning himself to speak something he considered sacred. "You will not go backward," Kalen said quietly. "Not while you are here. Not while I breathe." The certainty in his voice broke something in her, clean and sharp. Elira opened her eyes again, blinking through tears. The moon above felt brighter, closer. "How do you know?" she asked. Kaylin's gaze held hers, steady as stone. "Because the land is responding to you. Because the moon is responding to you. And because your body—" His eyes lowered again, careful, respectful, "has begun to remember." Remember. As if her blood carried memory older than pain. That night, the first moon of change left its mark. Elira didn't sleep until dawn, and when she finally lay down, she felt the hum settle into her bones with a new steadiness. Her dreams were vivid, not nightmares, not the frantic scraps of fear she'd lived with for years, but something deeper. Images of ancient forests, women standing under moonlight with palms glowing faintly, a child's laughter echoing in a place that felt like home. She woke with her heart racing, but not from terror, from longing. The days that followed shifted in small, undeniable ways. Elira's body grew stronger without effort. Hunger came differently now, not desperate, not sharp, but steady, insistent. Food tasted richer. Water felt like it carried meaning. Her senses sharpened further, and she learned quickly to control them, to breathe through the flood of information instead of drowning in it. Kaylin began to teach her, always on her terms. He showed her how to ground herself against the earth when energy surged too hard, how to press her palms to stone and feel the keep's ancient bones steady her, how to listen for the difference between fear and instinct. "You were trained to distrust yourself," he told her one afternoon as they walked along the river. "That training ends here." Elira knelt by the water, watching the current slide past. "I don't know how to stop expecting pain." Kaylin's gaze remained on the river. "You don't stop by forcing it," he said. "You stop when your body learns it is safe." Safe. The word still felt fragile on her tongue. By the second full moon, the transformation became harder to ignore. The air changed days before it rose, charged and restless. Elira felt it in her bones, like thunder held back behind cloud. Her skin grew warmer at night, as if her blood was reaching toward the moonlight before it even arrived. She began waking with her hand pressed to her abdomen without knowing she had moved it there. The warmth inside her no longer felt like a tide. It felt like a presence. One evening she stood in the library with her palm pressed to an old book's spine, and she felt something pulse through the room. An echo, a whisper of life that didn't come from her. She pulled her hand back sharply, breath caught. Kaylin, seated near the hearth, looked up instantly. "What did you feel?" "There's something here," Elira whispered. "In the walls, in the books, like history is alive." Kaylin rose slowly, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "You're connecting to the keep." Elira's mouth went dry. "That's not normal." "No," Kaylin admitted. "It's not." She stared at her hands, trembling slightly. "What am I becoming?" Kaylin's voice dropped, low and careful. "A conduit." The word made her stomach twist. She had been used her whole life. The idea of being a conduit sounded too close to being a tool. Kaylin seemed to sense it. "Not for me," he said firm. "Not for anyone. A conduit for yourself. For the truth your blood carries. For the life inside you that wants to rise." The life inside you. Elira's breath stuttered. She had not spoken the fear aloud, but it had been haunting her for days, a strange heaviness low in her belly, a growing sensitivity to scent and sound, a faint dizziness that came in waves and left her trembling. She didn't want to hope. She didn't want to imagine it, but that night, alone in her room, she pressed both hands to her abdomen and whispered into the quiet, "Tell me what you are." The warmth answered, not with words, but with sensation, a flutter. So soft, she nearly convinced herself she'd imagined it, then again. Elira sank onto the edge of the bed, shaking. Tears slid down her cheeks without permission. She stared at her stomach as if expecting it to change shape before her eyes. No, it was too soon, too impossible. She was the Omega they called barren, the failure, the worthless trade. Her hands trembled as she pressed them to her belly again. A third flutter, stronger, undeniable. Elira covered her mouth to keep from making a sound. Her entire body felt like it had been cracked open, the old lies spilling out and dissolving in the face of something alive. She did not sleep that night either. By the third moon, the change had become a quiet certainty. The keep felt like it knew. The land hummed beneath her feet whenever she walked outside. Wolves in the forest watched her without hostility, eyes reflecting moonlight as if acknowledging something they understood instinctively. Kaelin watched her differently too, not as a ruler gauging risk, but as someone guarding something precious. On the night the third full moon rose, Elira stood in the courtyard again, the same place where she had first felt the world pause around her. The air was cold, the sky clear, the moon so bright it made the stone glow. Kaelin stood a few steps away, silent, attentive. Elira's hand rested low on her abdomen now, almost without thought. The warmth there was constant, present. Kaelin's gaze flicked to her hand, then back to her eyes. "You know," he said softly. Elira's throat tightened. "I don't want to say it out loud." Kaelin nodded once. "Then don't. Not yet." The moon climbed higher, and the hum within Elira surged. Not violently, but with a deep, resonant fullness, like a song reaching its chorus. She swayed slightly, overwhelmed by the sensation of being more alive than she had ever been. Kaelin moved, not to take her, not to claim her, but to stand closer, just enough that his presence steadied the air around her. He did not touch her until she reached for him. Elira's fingers brushed his sleeve, an unconscious seeking. Kaelin's breath hitched, but he remained still, letting her choose. "Kaelin," she whispered. "Yes. I feel like my body is finally mine." Something raw flashed in his eyes, gone in an instant. "It is," he said. "It always was. They only convinced you otherwise." Elira looked up at the moon, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel judged by it. She felt seen, she felt chosen, and deep inside her, beneath the silver light of the third moon, the impossible truth pulsed steadily, small, warm, alive, rewriting every cruel word she had ever been branded with, not broken, not barren, becoming. The truth did not arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly, in the space between breaths, in the way Elira's body had begun to insist on being heard. She woke before dawn with her hand curved protectively over her abdomen, not from pain, but from instinct. Hunger followed her differently now, not sharp, not frantic, but deep and specific, as if her body knew exactly what it needed and would not be denied. Sounds carried farther. Scents layered themselves in ways that made her pause mid-step, overwhelmed by meaning she couldn't yet name. She told herself it was the change, the awakening, the bond. She told herself many things, but beneath every explanation pulsed the same quiet certainty, growing heavier by the day. Life. The night of the full moon arrived without warning. One moment the sky was bruised with cloud, the next it had cleared completely, revealing silver light so bright it turned the stone pale as bone. Elira felt it the moment the moon crested the mountains. Her breath stuttered. The warmth in her belly surged, not sharp, not frightening, but full, complete, as if something inside her had reached its own understanding and was no longer willing to remain unnamed. She didn't summon Kaelin. She didn't need to. He was already there when she reached the courtyard, standing in the same place he always did beneath the moon, his posture still, his presence steady. He turned as she approached, eyes lifting to her face, then dropping, just briefly, to her hands, clasped low at her abdomen. The look that crossed his features was not surprise. It was confirmation. Elira stopped several steps away, her pulse roaring in her ears. The air around them felt thick, charged, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. The words felt too fragile to trust to sound. Kaelin broke the silence gently. "You feel it clearly now?" She nodded, swallowing hard. "I tried not to," she whispered. "I told myself it was too soon, that it couldn't be real." "But it is," he said quietly. The moonlight pressed against her skin, warm and insistent. Elira closed her eyes as the sensation crested, no longer just warmth, but rhythm. A second pulse layered beneath her own heartbeat, faint but steady, undeniable in its presence. Her knees weakened. Kaelin moved instantly, not to claim, not to restrain, but to steady. His hand hovered near her elbow, waiting, always waiting, for permission. Elira nodded once, barely perceptible. His touch was light, grounding, and the moment it connected, the pulse flared in answer. Elira gasped, one hand flying to her mouth as tears spilled free. She wasn't sobbing. She wasn't breaking. She was recognizing. "There's someone there," she whispered, the words trembling out of her. "I'm not alone anymore." Kaelin's breath shuddered, the first visible crack in his composure she had ever seen. "No," he said softly. "You're not." Elira pulled back slightly, needing space to think, to feel. She pressed both hands flat against her abdomen, and this time the response was immediate, stronger than before. A flutter, unmistakable, followed by another. Her entire body went still. "I was told I couldn't," she said, voice raw. "They said my womb was empty, that my bloodline had failed, that I—" Her voice broke. Kaelin's expression darkened, not with anger, but with something far deeper. "They were wrong," he said, "and they had no right to carve that lie into you." Elira let out a shaky breath that was almost a laugh. "I believe them." "Of course you did," he replied gently. "You were taught to." The moon climbed higher, bathing the courtyard in silver. Elira felt the life inside her settle, as if listening. As if aware of being spoken of being acknowledged. The thought sent a fresh wave of emotion through her, fear, awe, wonder braided so tightly she couldn't separate them. "What does this mean?" she asked. Kaelin didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, not just at her body, but at her face, her trembling hands, the years of pain etched into her posture. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, reverent. "It means the awakening has completed its first cycle," he said. "It means your blood remembered what it was meant to do." "And the child?" Elira whispered. "The child is real," Kaelin said. "Alive, anchored." Her knees finally gave out, and this time she didn't fight it. She sank onto the cold stone, breath coming fast and shallow, palms still pressed protectively to her belly. Kaelin knelt with her, not touching unless she leaned into him, which she did, trembling. "I don't know how to do this," she said into the quiet. "I don't know how to be what everyone suddenly thinks I am." "You don't need to be anything else," Kaelin said. "You only need to be Elira." She lifted her head, eyes red. "And if the Pax find out?" "They will," he said without hesitation. The certainty chilled her. "Then what?" "Then they will come," Kaelin replied. "Some to kneel, some to bargain, some to take." Elira's arms tightened around herself instinctively. "And my family?" Kaelin's gaze hardened, steel beneath calm. "They forfeited their claim long ago." The pulse inside her flared again, not violently, but with quiet insistence, as if in agreement. Elira stared down at her stomach, still flat, still unchanged to the eye. It felt unreal that something so small, so invisible, could hold such power, that her body, her supposedly broken body, had carried this truth all along. "I don't feel cursed," she said softly. I feel right. Kaylin's voice dropped to a near whisper. That is because creation is not a punishment. The words settled deep in her bones. The moon reached its peak, and the air shifted again, not alarmed this time, but aware. Elira felt it ripple outward from her, a soft wave traveling through stone and soil, through root and river, through every living thing under the northern sky. Somewhere in the forest, wolves lifted their heads and howled, not in warning, but in recognition. Elira closed her eyes, tears sliding freely now, not from fear, from grief for the girl she had been, from wonder at the woman she was becoming, from the impossible, undeniable truth pulsing beneath her ribs. I was never empty, she whispered. Kaylin placed a hand over hers at last, firm and warm. No, he said. You were waiting. They stayed there beneath the moon for a long time, neither speaking, the silence heavy with meaning. Above them, the silver light held steady, no longer shifting, no longer uncertain. The impossible life inside Elira had been acknowledged, and the world, whether it was ready or not, had begun to change. The first sign came on a wind that shouldn't have reached the keep. Elira felt it before anyone announced it, before guards shifted on the walls or the gates groaned open. She was in the garden courtyard, fingers brushing the tips of frost-kissed herbs when the air tightened around her like a held breath. The hum beneath her ribs sharpened, no longer gentle. The life inside her pulsed once, quick, startled, and her hand flew instinctively to her belly. Kaylin appeared at the edge of the courtyard, as if the stone itself had delivered him. His gaze moved over her in a single sweep, reading the shift in her posture, the way she had gone still. You feel them, he said. Elira swallowed. Her mouth was suddenly dry. It's familiar, she whispered, as if saying it softly would make it less real. Like a scent I've tried to forget. Kaylin's jaw tightened, and the calm in his eyes turned sharp. Stay here. Elira shook her head immediately. No. He paused, gaze locking onto hers. In that look was everything he never said aloud. Fear restrained, rage leashed, protectiveness sharpened to a point. He could have ordered her, could have commanded her to remain behind walls and guards. He didn't. Then stay close, he said instead. And if I tell you to step back, you do it. Elira nodded, palms still pressed to her belly, and followed him through the keep's corridors toward the main hall. The walls hummed around her, responding to her tension as if the stone had nerves. Torches flared brighter as they passed. The air tasted metallic, charged with something old and unpleasant. By the time they reached the entrance, the doors were already open. Her family stood just beyond the threshold. For a heartbeat, Elira couldn't move. The sight of them was like stepping into a cold memory. Her father in his worn coat, shoulders squared as if he still had the right to stand tall. Her mother beside him, eyes too hard, too empty. Her uncle slightly behind, gaze sharp and calculating. The same man who had called her useless as if he were discussing a broken tool. They looked smaller here. Not because they were physically diminished, but because the keep made everyone feel the weight of what it held. And because Kaylin stood beside Elira like a quiet storm, his presence warping the air around him. Elira felt the life inside her settle into stillness, as if listening. Her father's gaze landed on her, and for the first time in her life she saw something like uncertainty crack through his expression. Then he smiled. It was the same smile he had worn when he signed her away, polite, performative, made for outsiders. Elira, he said, voice carrying too far in the open hall. There you are. The words made her stomach twist. Kaylin did not move. State your purpose, he said, calm as stone. Elira's uncle stepped forward first, hands lifted in a gesture meant to appear respectful. My king, he began, we come with gratitude. Truly, your generosity, settling our debts, saved our household from ruin. Kaylin's eyes did not soften. You did not come to express gratitude? Her mother spoke then, voice thin as ice. We heard rumors, she said, eyes fixed on Elira's abdomen as though she could see through fabric and flesh. Rumors we did not believe at first, but then the healers started whispering. The moon, shifting, the northern lands reacting. And now? Her gaze flicked back to Elira's face, sharp and appraising. Now we see why. Elira felt something flare behind her ribs. Not power exactly, but anger sharpened into clarity. All her life they had looked at her like absence, like lack, and now, in the first moment they had returned, they were already calculating her worth. She stepped forward before she could stop herself. The guards along the walls tensed. I'm not an item you misplaced, Elira said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Her father's smile faltered, then recovered quickly. Of course not. Don't be dramatic. We're your family. Family. The word tasted bitter. Kaylin's gaze slid toward Elira, subtle, checking, not controlling, asking. Elira breathed once, grounding herself. She felt the stone beneath her feet, the steady pulse of the keep, the faint rhythm inside her that answered her breath. She was not alone. Her uncle cleared his throat. We came because circumstances have changed, he said carefully, choosing each word like a coin. When we offered Elira, we did so under the belief that she was— His gaze flicked briefly toward her, and the old cruelty sharpened, unable to fulfill certain roles. Kaylin's eyes narrowed. You branded her. The uncle's hands lifted again. We did what we had to do. We were drowning in debt, and she had no prospects, no bond, no future. The trade was merciful, if you think about it. Elira's vision blurred at the edges, not from tears, but from the sudden heat rising beneath her skin. The air thickened around her, responding. Kaylin's voice cut through it, low and dangerous. You sold her. The words landed like a blade. Her father shifted, uncomfortable now. My king, let's not use such ugly terms. Ugly terms for an ugly act, Kaylin replied, still calm. That calm frightened Elira more than shouting would have. It was the quiet of a predator deciding whether to pounce. Her mother took a half step forward, eyes fixed on Elira. We have rights, she said. Blood rights. If she carries— Her voice hitched slightly, and Elira realized, with a cold clarity, that her mother was afraid. If she carries life, then that life is tied to our line. Elira laughed once, sharp and humorless. You didn't want my line. You called it failed. Her mother's jaw tightened. We didn't know. You didn't care, Elira corrected, and her voice did not break. Something shifted in the hall then, something subtle but undeniable. The torches along the walls flared brighter. A low hum rose through the stone as if the keep itself had stiffened in response. Her father's eyes widened briefly, and Elira felt satisfaction flicker through her fear. They were realizing it now. This place was not theirs. This power was not theirs. Her uncle swallowed hard. We came to discuss terms, he said, voice thinning. If Elira is carrying an heir of significance, then it would be appropriate for her to return home, to be protected by her blood. Elira stared at him. Protected? The word came out like a wound. Where was that protection when you let the town spit at me? When healers humiliated me? When you made me sleep in the cold storage room because I didn't deserve the warm rooms? Her father's face tightened. Watch your tongue. Elira's laugh this time was softer, almost stunned. You still think you can say that to me? Kaylin stepped forward then, finally. Not fast, not aggressive, just inevitable, like winter rolling in. He positioned himself slightly ahead of Elira, not blocking her, but shielding her, the way he always did when danger approached. His voice was quiet, and it carried across the hall with the certainty of law. "She will not return with you," he said. Her father's posture stiffened. "My king, you relinquished any claim the moment you exchanged her for coin," Kaelin continued. "Your debt is settled. Your bargain is finished." The uncle's eyes darted toward Elira's abdomen again, and Elira felt a cold disgust twist in her gut. "But the child," her uncle began. Kaelin's gaze snapped to him, silver flashing. "Do not speak of what you do not understand." Elira's hand tightened over her belly as the life inside her pulsed, steady now, as though reassured by Kaelin's voice. Her mother's mask finally cracked. "We are not leaving empty-handed," she hissed. Kaelin's expression did not change. "Then you will leave with less than you arrived with." The threat was not shouted. It didn't need to be. Her father's eyes flicked over the guards, the vast hall, the ancient stone, and something like fear finally overcame pride. Still, he tried one last angle, one Elira recognized too well. He turned his gaze to her, softening his voice, letting it drip with false tenderness. "Elira," he said, "you don't understand what you're doing. You're scared, that's all. Come home. We'll treat you differently now. Elira stepped out from behind Kaelin before she could stop herself. Kaelin's body tensed, ready to pull her back, but he didn't. He let her move. Elira stood facing her father, heart hammering, and for the first time she truly saw him, not as the man who decided her worth, but as a small, frightened person who needed control to feel powerful. "You're not here because you love me," she said quietly. "You're here because you heard I'm valuable now." Her father's jaw clenched. "That's not—" "Yes," Elira said, and her voice remained steady. "It is." Silence stretched, the kind that pressed down on everyone present. Elira breathed in slowly, feeling the keep's steady pulse under her feet, feeling the moon beyond the roof, feeling the life inside her anchored by something deeper than fear. She lifted her chin. "I'm not going back," she said. "Not with you. Not to that house. Not to the girl you forced me to be." Her mother's eyes narrowed. "You think you're better than us now?" Elira felt something in her chest loosen, years of shame releasing like a knot finally cut. "No," she said softly. "I think I'm free." Kaelin's hand brushed lightly against her back. Just a touch, not to steer, but to reassure. Elira stood taller. Her uncle's voice turned desperate. "My king, you must understand. If she carries life, it belongs to the packs, to the old laws. Omegas don't get to decide." Kaelin's eyes went dangerously still. Elira felt the air tighten again, heavy with looming violence. Kaelin spoke, each word deliberate, unmovable. "She is not an Omega to be traded," he said. "She is not a vessel to be claimed by council, clan, or bloodline. She is under my protection, and she chooses her own fate." Her father's face twisted, anger flaring over fear. "She's ours." Kaelin did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. "She was never yours," Kaelin said beneath the weight of the hall. "You simply had the misfortune of being the first to fail her." The words struck like thunder. Elira's breath left her in a rush. Her family went still, shocked into silence, and in that silence, Elira realized something that made her hands tremble. Not from fear, but from power settling into place. Kaelin wasn't only defending her. He was naming her truth out loud, in front of the people who had tried to erase it. Her mother's face paled. Her father looked like he wanted to speak, but couldn't find words that didn't sound like greed. Finally, Kaelin lifted a hand, one simple gesture. Guards stepped forward immediately, flanking Elira's family. "You will be escorted beyond my borders," Kaelin said. "If you return uninvited, you will be treated as trespassers, not kin." Her father's mouth opened, closed. Then he tried to salvage his pride with one last glare at Elira, as if intimidation could still work. Elira met his gaze, calm and unwavering. He looked away first, As they were led out, Elira's mother turned back one last time, eyes sharp with resentment. "You'll regret this," she said. "You'll come crawling back when the world turns on you." Elira's fingers tightened over her abdomen. The life inside her pulsed steadily, unafraid. "Maybe," Elira said quietly, "but I won't be alone." Her mother's face twisted, and then the doors closed, sealing her family out like a bad memory finally shut away. For a long moment, Elira stood in the silence that followed, chest rising and falling too quickly. The hall felt warmer now, as if the keep itself had released tension. The torches steadied. Kaelin remained beside her, his presence a quiet wall against the tremor still in her limbs. Elira swallowed hard. "They're going to tell others," she whispered. Kaelin nodded. "Yes." Fear flickered through her, sharp and cold. "Then they'll come." "Yes," Kaelin said again, and his voice was calm enough to hold her fear without dismissing it. Elira turned slightly, looking up at him. "Are you—" her voice caught. "Are you angry?" Kaelin's gaze softened, but the steel beneath it remained. "I am patient," he said, "but not with those who harm what they were meant to protect." Elira's throat tightened. "And what am I meant to protect?" Kaelin looked down at her hand over her belly, then back into her eyes. "Yourself," he said. "First." The words settled into her like a vow. Outside, the wind shifted again, carrying the scent of distant movement beyond the borders. Elira felt it in her bones, the world stirring, packs whispering, the moon watching. Her family had come to reclaim her worth. All they had done was announce it to the world. And now, the Northern Territories would have to decide whether they would bow to what was awakening, or try to destroy it before it rose fully into power. The gathering was not announced with horns or summons. It spread the way truth always did, quietly at first, carried on breath and scent and the low tremor of the land itself. By the time the moon began its climb, they were already arriving at the edges of the northern clearing. Alphas with guarded eyes, betas stiff with tension, elders cloaked in tradition and fear. They kept their distance at first, forming a loose ring beneath the open sky, drawn by something they did not yet understand but could not ignore. Elira felt them long before she saw them. The life inside her stirred uneasily, a soft warning that tightened her spine. She stood beside Kaelin at the heart of the clearing, the stone cool beneath her feet, the moon's light brushing her skin like a question. She did not hide her hand where it rested low on her abdomen. She would not shrink now. Kaelin's presence was different tonight, not louder, not sharper. He was absolute. He stood with his shoulders squared and his gaze lifted, not challenging, not pleading, simply present, like the mountain itself had decided to speak. The air bent subtly around him, power held in check not by weakness, but by choice. They came closer when the moon reached its peak. Elira recognized some of them from memory and rumor, the pack leaders who had once turned their backs on her family. The elders who had nodded along when healers branded her barren. She felt no satisfaction watching their expressions shift as they took her in. Only a quiet resolve settled deeper into her bones. Whispers rippled through the clearing. "That's her. The Omega. The one they sold. The one carrying—" Kaelin lifted a hand. The sound died instantly. "You stand on my land," he said, his voice carrying without effort. "And beneath my moon." The elders stepped forward first, robes brushing the ground, symbols of old authority glinting faintly. One of them, a woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes like sharpened flint, inclined her head. "Alpha King," she said, "we come seeking clarity." Kaelin's gaze did not waver. "You come because you sensed a shift," he replied, "and because fear followed it." The elder did not deny it. "The moon has not responded like this in generations." "It has not had reason to," Kaelin said. Elira felt the life inside her pulse once, steady and calm, as if listening. Another alpha stepped forward, younger, eyes sharp with calculation. "There are concerns," he said carefully. "If what we hear is true, then this situation affects more than your territory." Kalen turned his head slightly, silver catching in his gaze. "Everything affects more than one territory," he said. "That does not make it yours." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The silver-haired elder's eyes flicked briefly to Elira's abdomen. "If she carries life," she said, "then the old laws apply. Omegas do not decide the fate of—" "No," Kalen said quietly. The single word struck harder than a shout. The elder stiffened. "Those laws were written to control fear," Kalen interrupted, "not to honor life." Silence fell, heavy and charged. Elira felt her pulse slow, grounding itself against the steadiness of Kalen's voice. She had been afraid of this moment, of being spoken about, decided upon, turned into an argument she could not interrupt. Instead, she was standing in the open, seen. Another elder spoke, voice trembling with restrained urgency. "You would risk war for this?" Kalen did not hesitate. "I would prevent it." The distinction landed like a blade turned sideways, unexpected, precise. "You assume the world will accept this," the younger alpha said. "A child born outside the old balance. A union without dominance, without claim." Kalen's gaze swept the clearing slowly, deliberately. "The world does not need to accept it," he said. "It needs to adapt." The moon brightened overhead, silver light intensifying until the clearing glowed. Elira felt the warmth inside her surge, not violently, but with quiet agreement. The land responded, a low hum rising beneath their feet, steady and unmistakable. The silver-haired elder took a step back, eyes widening. "The moon." Kalen turned slightly then, positioning himself so that Elira stood fully behind him, not hidden, but protected by the simple geometry of his stance. He placed one hand over his heart, the other at his side, open and empty. "I will say this once," he said, and the clearing leaned in, breath held. Elira was never infertile. She was never broken. She was never yours to trade or judge. Elira's chest tightened, emotion burning hot and sharp behind her eyes. "She stands under my protection, not because she carries life," Kalen continued, voice steady as stone, "but because she is life, and because she chose to stand here." A murmur of surprise rippled outward. Kalen's gaze dropped briefly, respectfully, to Elira's hand over her belly. "The child she carries is not a weapon, not a bargaining chip, not a threat to be eliminated." He lifted his eyes again, silver blazing. "It is proof." "Proof of what?" someone demanded from the outer ring. Kalen's answer came without pause. "That the old laws failed, that fear lied, that power taken by force rots, but power offered freely endures." The moon flared. Elira felt it then, not a surge, not a revelation, but certainty settling into place like stone. She was not trembling, she was not small. She was standing at the center of something vast and unyielding, and it was not crushing her. It was holding her. The silver-haired elder bowed her head slowly, something in her expression shifting, not submission, but acknowledgement. "And if others do not agree?" Kalen's voice dropped, quiet but unbreakable. "Then they will learn." A long silence followed. One by one, the leaders began to lower their heads. Not all, not fully, but enough. Enough to signal hesitation where once there had been certainty, enough to let fear loosen its grip. The younger alpha looked from Kalen to Elira, calculation faltering as he took in her calm, the steady pulse of the land, the moon unwavering above. He stepped back, jaw tight, but said nothing. The gathering began to break apart slowly, voices low, movements cautious. No cheers, no declarations. just the sound of an old order shifting under the weight of something it could no longer deny. When the clearing finally emptied, the moon remained. Elira exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her legs felt weak, not from fear, but from the release of it. Kaelin turned toward her, concern flickering across his features. "Are you?" She stepped forward before he could finish and rested her forehead briefly against his chest. The contact was instinctive, grounding. Kaelin stilled, then rested a hand lightly between her shoulders, solid and warm. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured. "Yes," he said quietly. "I did." She pulled back enough to look up at him, eyes bright. "They'll come again." Kaelin nodded. "Yes." "And next time," she said softly, hand tightening over her belly, "they won't come just to talk." His gaze followed the motion, then returned to her face. "Then we will be ready." Elira looked up at the moon, steady and bright, no longer shifting, no longer uncertain. For the first time, she did not feel like she was standing at the edge of something she didn't understand. She felt like she was standing at the beginning. And beneath the moon's unblinking gaze, the Alpha King had drawn his line, not in blood, not in fear, but in truth. And the world had listened. The night after the gathering passed without celebration. There were no feasts, no howls of victory echoing through the northern forest. The keep settled into a deep, listening quiet, as if the land itself were processing what had been spoken beneath the moon. Elira welcomed the silence. It gave her space to breathe, to feel the steady presence inside her, to understand that nothing had been taken from her that night. Something had been returned. She stood at the high balcony just before dawn, the sky pale and bruised at the horizon. The moon was sinking now, its work done, leaving the world to its own reckoning. Elira rested both hands over her abdomen, feeling the life there, calm, anchored, undeniable. For the first time, she did not feel like she was protecting something fragile. She felt like she was protecting something inevitable. Footsteps approached behind her, unhurried. She didn't turn. She knew who it was by the way the air shifted, by the familiar steadiness that wrapped around her without pressing. "You didn't sleep," Kaelin said softly. Elira smiled faintly. "Neither did you." He came to stand beside her, not touching, simply sharing the view. The first light of morning painted his profile in gold and shadow, softening the edges of the Alpha King into something more human, more real. "They're leaving," he said, "the packs that came last night. Some will spread word, some will pretend they never doubted." Elira nodded. "And some will wait." "Yes." She exhaled slowly. "I'm not afraid of that anymore." Kaelin glanced at her, searching her face. "You shouldn't be fearless," he said. "Only honest." Elira turned to him then. "I've been honest my whole life," she said quietly. "About my fear, about my weakness, about what they told me I was." Her voice didn't shake. "But now," she continued, "I'm being honest about something else." Kaelin waited. "I'm done letting other people name me." The words felt like a vow, spoken aloud, solid and binding in the best way. Elira felt the land respond, not with thunder or flare, but with a deep, settling calm, as if something that had been off balance had finally aligned. Kaelin inclined his head, not as a ruler acknowledging a subject, but as an equal recognizing choice. "Then tell me," he said, "who are you?" Elira looked back toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to break free of the mountains. "I'm Elira," she said simply, "and I'm done surviving." The day unfolded differently after that. It was subtle at first, the way the wolves in the forest no longer watched her cautiously but openly. The way the guards in the keep bowed, not deeply, not in submission, but with respect that was offered rather than required. The way the land itself seemed to ease around her, paths opening where she walked, air warming at her back. Elira moved through it all with quiet certainty. She went to the old council chamber that afternoon, a place she had been told was not meant for Omegas. The doors opened without resistance. She stood at the center of the circular room, sunlight filtering through the high windows, and felt the echo of every decision ever made there. She did not ask permission. She spoke instead. "I will not be hidden," she said into the stone and air. "I will not be traded. I will not be protected into silence." The warmth inside her pulsed, strong and steady, as if in agreement. Later, when Kaelin joined her, he did not take the central seat. He stood beside her, hand resting lightly at her back, presence unwavering. "You understand what this means," he said quietly. "The moment you step fully into this, there is no going back." Elira met his gaze. There was never anything to go back to. That night, she stood beneath the moon once more. But this time, she was not waiting for it to answer her. She lifted her chin, letting the light wash over her, feeling the deep connection between sky, land, and blood. The bond between her and Kaelin hummed, not a tether, not a chain, but a shared rhythm, strong and unforced. She turned to him, heart steady. "I don't want to be sheltered," she said. "I don't want my story told for me." Kaelin's eyes searched hers, then softened. "Then tell it," he said. Elira stepped forward into the open clearing, the same place where her family had once tried to reclaim her worth, where packs had gathered to decide her fate. She stood alone now, shoulders back, hands resting openly at her sides. "I was sold," she said, voice carrying easily into the night. "I was branded broken. I was told my only value was what I lacked." The words did not hurt anymore. "I am not here because I was chosen by power," she continued. "I am here because I chose myself." The moon shone steady overhead. "I carry life," Elira said, and this time her hand rose to her abdomen without hesitation. "Not because I was claimed, not because I was forced, but because love without chains awakened what fear tried to bury." A hush fell over the clearing, not imposed, but earned. Elira breathed in, grounding herself, feeling the future settle into place around her. "I will not rule through dominance," she said. "I will not trade silence for safety. I will build something different." She turned then, meeting Kaelin's gaze across the space between them. He did not step forward. He did not claim the moment. He waited. Elira closed the distance herself and stood at his side, aligning their shadows beneath the moon. Kaelin spoke once, his voice calm and unyielding. "She stands by choice," he said. "And so do I." The declaration rippled outward, not as command, but as truth. Elira felt it then, not fear, not doubt, but clarity blooming bright and clean in her chest. She was not an Omega discarded, not a mistake corrected too late. She was a beginning. As the night deepened and the moon held its watch, Elira rested a hand over her abdomen, feeling the steady pulse of the future she carried. She thought of the girl she had been, quiet, shrinking, convinced she was empty. She honored her. Then she let her go. Elira did not leave the clearing as someone protected. She left it as someone claimed, by herself, by her choices, by a future no one would ever sell again. Chosen, not sold. And beneath the moon that no longer needed to shift, the world took its first careful step toward what she would build next.